Welcome to Interpersonal and Small Group Communication. This is going to be a little longer lecture because I've combined two chapters, but it's very interesting and it has to do with communicating one-on-one and communicating in small groups. So watch the lecture all the way through as you read the chapter. So let's get started. So what is interpersonal communication? Well, interpersonal communication is where you have relationships with two or more people. It could be your parents, your spouse, your siblings. It's an interdependent relationship generally, and it's consistent pattern of interaction, which means it's a constant interaction. And it's an interaction over time, weeks, months, years. That's what it is. So basic interpersonal needs are inclusion, meaning that you want to be included, affection, caring, and some measure of control in a positive way. So there are complementary relationships and there are symmetrical relationships. So there is a dark side to interpersonal relationships. Sometimes when it's a spouse or even a parent, or it could be the opposite, a child to a parent, there can be conflict. In relationships of where it's a significant other, there can be obsession, misunderstandings. Codependency is where you kind of allow a person's negative behavior to be rationalized because you care for them. And often this leads to abuse. So here's what's called the Johari window. Have you ever heard of it? The Johari window, it's got quadrants, and it was developed by a psychologist or psychiatrist, I believe. And it is the ability to know yourself more or less. So in the first quadrant, you'll notice that it is known to others and known to self. So that's the open part. So it's what others know about you, and it's also what you know about yourself. Now in the second quadrant is not known to self, but known to others. So there may be blind spots. You might think that you're an outgoing person, but your friends might consider you a closed person. It's kind of what we perceive ourselves to be. We're not necessarily who we are. In the third quadrant, it's not known to others, but known to self. This is the hidden part of us, what we know about ourselves that we want to hide from others. And we all have these things. Finally, the fourth quadrant is not known to ourselves and not known to others. So sometimes, maybe when we're in a situation that requires us to maybe get angry or upset, we may not know that we could go that far, and maybe others didn't know also, or vice versa. So that's the Johari window. So in interpersonal relationships, it's important to self-disclose. Your textbook talks about increased understanding of others. That means that the more that you self-disclose things about yourselves, you might say, I'm not necessarily a tidy person. I'm not really a timely person, but I am a caring person. And so you disclose these things to others. I'm really good with money. Or you might say, I'm not really good with money. These are the disclosures that you might have in terms of self-disclosures that others may appreciate. And so it helps in many ways. And then there's factors of inappropriate self-disclosure. And so remember that at the beginning you can disclose, but it should be over time when the relationship develops. Not necessarily immediately do you need to disclose everything. But at some point, as the relationship grows, it's important to self-disclose. So you value friendships and you contribute to the well-being of others, and interpersonal relationships are based on shared activities and the quality affected by attachment styles. So we all have an attachment style. And so we have role limiting interactions, which means that you don't go beyond certain boundaries. There are friendly relationships, and then there are relationships that are moving toward friendly relationships. There's nascent friendships, stabilized friendships, and the waning stage of friendships. And this is when maybe the friendship is not working out anymore and you may have to move on. So we know that social media is now a part of our everyday life. And so we still have to be careful how we disclose things, especially for those who are introverted, who tend to be a lot more willing to disclose immediately. But it is important that we temper these things. And so we have something called Baxter's dialectic tensions. And this is, let's take a scenario where you've decided to move in with your significant other, right? Or there's let's say that when you get married, you'd like to keep separate bank accounts, right? And then and that's called the separation. And then there's stability. I'm glad we've never moved, right? And so you're with somebody and you enjoy the interaction. And then there's change. And this happens in relationships sometimes. Feeling restless. I think it's time to plan a vacation. And then there's expression. I did a really stupid thing. And let me tell you what it was. And then there's privacy. I'd rather not explain what I did. And then the interaction comes in when these things lead to tension, which is inevitable. Now, we have what's called relational deterioration. This is when relationships start to pull apart because of some of those tensions. It's natural. Some relationships, they last and some don't. So you pull away. You avoid spending time together. And then you may terminate the relationship. And then there are motivations for terminating relationships. Hurtful messages. This is where maybe negative things are constantly being spoken of. Deceptive communication, when you're not honest. Aggressiveness, argumentativeness, and defensiveness. All these things can lead to termination in relationships. And take a look at what's called the Gibbs cycle. And this is where you have a decision to make. So what's happened? Maybe somebody hurt the feelings. What were you thinking about the feelings at the time? What was good and what was bad? And so now you're evaluating what caused the defensiveness or what caused the pulling away. You analyze, what sense can I make of the situation? And then you draw conclusions. What else could I have done? And then there's an action. If the situation arises again, what would I do differently? And the cycle begins again, depending on. So now let's talk about small group communication, shall we? So why do we study small group communication? Well, in every environment that you're going to go in, you're going to at some point become a part of a group. And so you have to understand how to meet the needs of the group. You have to understand about inclusion, affection, and control. And the groups are everywhere. Everywhere you go, there are groups. So group skills are needed. Employers report that they want folks who have group skill ability. Effective group skills require training, though, and participating in the democratic process of groups. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So there are collective entities, and that's usually 3 to 9. That's a group. Then there's interaction between members, and then there's interdependence, meaning that if it's a class, and if you're in a group in a class, the interdependence is where the group is depending on each other for the grade. So there are types of small groups. They're assigned, like in a classroom. There are emergent groups, like when you get together for a specific reason. They're task-oriented, meaning that maybe you go to Habitat for Humanity and you help work on a house for a day, and then they're relationship-oriented groups. And this happens in families and relationships. So you've got to have group norms. Those are the rules. You've got group roles, and you have types of roles. So you have formal, which is positional, and you have informal, which is behavioral. So think of formal as, somebody's elected the leader, maybe the vice president, and then informal behaviors are more about how the behaviors emerge in the relationship. This person is good with PowerPoint, so we're going to make them in charge of the PowerPoint. This person's good with research, and that is behavioral. So behaviors that define roles are task functions, maintenance functions, and self-centered functions. So then the functions, such as a task function, focuses on completing a goal in a group. The maintenance function, it focuses on maintaining the positive relationships within the group, the harmony. And then the self-centered function, it focuses on the speaker's own interests instead of the group's interest. So take a look at these charts and you'll see the kinds of functions created in the roles in groups. So take a look at both of those charts. Now, groups, for them to be cohesive, must have trust, must have supportiveness, and must have cohesiveness. That means they must be able to work together. But guard against groupthink. And what is groupthink? This is where all group members think the same, and it's not necessarily a good thing. And so there are defensive behaviors in groups, right? We know this. Evaluation means that you're judging a person. You might say statements like, oh, that's completely ridiculous. And then there are supportive behaviors in groups. And this is where it's more equal and you want to minimize differences by treating people as equals. And you might say a statement like, I don't have all the answers. What do the rest of you think? Now, there's diversity within groups. Obviously, if you're in a group, you are going to have differences. So the observable differences would be ethnicity, sex, abilities, but there's also the implicit. This is within the groups, and this is personality types. Examples and choices such as religion, orientation, educational background, those are considered implicit, diverse parts of groups. So, a group is generally going to need a leader. So some leaders are designated, which means that they are told you're the leader, maybe by the professor, or maybe in a church or a synagogue, in an organization, you're a designated leader. Then there are emergent leaders, and these are people who kind of, after being in a group and somebody seems like they've got the leadership qualities, and folks say, hey, look, do you want to lead us? There are tensions within groups, right? And so there are leader type tensions, And there are listener versus talking type tensions. There's task versus non-task type tensions, and there's process versus outcome. And read the descriptions of those, because I'm sure that some of these will resonate with you. So there's leadership styles. Have you heard of the autocratic style? This is where you say, do this or else. Then there's the laissez-faire, and this is what, do whatever you want. And then there's the democratic, and this is where do what you think we should do. And we kind of vote. That's the democratic leadership style. So there are problem solving and decision makings within groups, right? So there are types of questions such as fact, value, and policies within groups. And this is how you problem solve and you make decisions within groups. What are the facts? What are we valuing here? And what are the policies, the rules? Do we have rules to follow, and are we following them? Then to have effective group problem solving, you want to word things in concrete terms, not abstract terms. And then problem question versus solution question. These can be an issue. The problem question is different. The solution question is where you want to be to get the group to move along. So look at some of these problem questions. I'm going to read one of each and then you read the rest. And think about yourself in groups. So a problem question in a group might be, how can we reduce complaints about parking on campus? But a solution question might be, how can we increase the number of parking spaces in the campus lots? I hope you see the difference there. So again, effective group problem solving, you've got to discuss the criteria. It's an absolute must. So what are absolute musts and what are things that are important? And you've got to get those things out on the table. When you do, you know what you have to do and what you might want to do, but you don't have to do it. Now, communicating in groups, right? So you relate to statements in previous remarks. Use clear, common language in small groups. Speak concisely. This is where you're not speaking 5-10 minutes and nobody else gets their point across. State one point at a time and let another person speak. So, ethical group members are willing to share their perspectives. They're honest and truthful. They evaluate information thoroughly without bias. And we all have a little bit of bias, but as unbiased as you can be. And they behave with integrity. And they manage group conflict. They don't cause it, they manage it. So, in essence, there you have it in this lecture. We talked about interpersonal communication and we talked about small group communication. I'll see you in the next module.